The crisp autumn air wrapped around Logan as he stood silently in the cemetery, the early morning stillness mirroring the void in his heart. It had been 2 long years since his son, Ethan, had died in a tragic car accident. Every visit to Ethan's grave had become a ritual, a fragile bridge connecting Logan to the son he had lost and, in some ways, had never fully understood. Logan's life had always been defined by control. As a powerful businessman, he dictated outcomes and bent circumstances to his will. Yet, standing in front of Ethan's gravestone, Logan felt powerless. No amount of wealth, influence, or strategy could undo the loss that haunted him. On this particular morning, however, the solitude he sought was disrupted. As Logan approached the grave, he noticed a young man kneeling by the headstone. The breeze tousled the boy's dark hair, and his too-thin jacket barely shielded him from the chill. His hands were clasped tightly in a silent prayer, his bowed head exuding a quiet sorrow that tugged at something deep within Logan. An unfamiliar irritation surged in Logan. This was supposed to be his moment of reflection, his private time with Ethan. He cleared his throat, making his presence known. The boy flinched and turned, startled, his pale blue eyes wide with a mix of fear and sadness. "I'm sorry," the young man stammered, scrambling to his feet and brushing dirt from his jeans. "I didn't mean to intrude." Logan's gaze hardened. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "Do you even know whose grave this is?" The boy hesitated, his eyes flicking back to the headstone before meeting Logan's again. "Yes, sir," he said softly. "I know exactly who this is." Something in the boy's voice, a blend of grief and conviction, caught Logan off guard. Before he could press further, the boy stepped back, murmured another apology, and disappeared down the cemetery path, leaving Logan bewildered and uneasy. As Logan stared after him, a strange, nagging feeling settled over him. There had been something familiar about the boy, something he couldn't quite place. For the first time in years, Logan's thoughts weren't consumed by loss alone, but by a question he couldn't shake. Who was that young man, and why did he seem to belong here, at Ethan's grave? The encounter at the grave lingered in Logan's mind like an unfinished sentence. As the days passed, he replayed the moment in his head. The boy's face, the sadness in his eyes, and the way he seemed to know Ethan's grave intimately. It stirred something in Logan he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity tinged with an unexpected sense of unease. In the vast emptiness of his mansion, Logan paced the long halls, his footsteps echoing through the silence. The once vibrant home, filled with this family's energy, now felt like a mausoleum. Every room was a shrine to the life he had built but could no longer enjoy. Ethan's absence was a void that no wealth or success could fill. Unable to shake the questions gnawing at him, Logan decided to act. He called in a trusted private investigator, a man he relied on during business dealings. "I need you to find someone," Logan said, handing over a detailed description of the young man. "He was at my son's grave. I need to know who he is and why he was there." The investigator nodded, accustomed to Logan's unrelenting drive for answers. "I'll get on it right away," he said. While he waited, Logan immersed himself in memories of Ethan. Photographs, trophies, and old letters filled his study as he tried to piece together the son he had lost. Logan had always pushed Ethan to follow in his footsteps, grooming him to take over the family business. But their relationship had been strained, marked by clashes over expectations and independence. In his heart, Logan knew he had demanded too much and given too little. Now, with Ethan gone, regret weighed heavier than ever. A week later, Logan's phone buzzed with the investigator's update. "We've found him," the voice on the other end said. "His name is Lucas. He's 20 years old, and there's something you need to know." Logan's heart quickened. "Go on." "Lucas is Ethan's son. Your grandson." The words hit Logan like a freight train, leaving him momentarily speechless. "What?" he finally managed to say. How is that possible?" The investigator explained. Lucas's mother, Amelia, had been involved with Ethan years ago. It was a relationship Logan barely remembered, a fleeting romance he had dismissed at the time as a distraction. After Ethan ends things, Amelia disappears, raising Lucas alone. She had never contacted the family, likely because of the rift between Ethan and Logan. As Logan processed the revelation, a tidal wave of emotions crashed over him: disbelief, guilt, and a faint glimmer of hope. He had lost Ethan, but now he had a grandson who carried a piece of Ethan. Logan knew he couldn't let this discovery slip through his fingers. He had spent years mourning Ethan, regretting the distance between them. Now, he had a chance to make things right, at least with Lucas. Determined, he asked for Lucas's whereabouts. Amelia and Lucas live in a modest neighborhood on the other side of town, the investigator said. I've got the address. What do you want to do? Logan didn't hesitate. I need to meet him. The next afternoon, Logan drove himself to the address. A small, weathered house with a sagging porch and a yard in disrepair. It starkly contrasted the life of luxury Ethan had grown up in. Logan sat in his car momentarily, rehearsing what he might say, but the words felt inadequate. Finally, he stepped out and knocked on the door. It opened to reveal a woman he barely recognized, Amelia. The years had aged her, but her eyes still held the defiant spark he remembered. Her expression shifted from surprise to guarded suspicion. Logan, she said flatly, what are you doing here? I came to talk about Lucas, Logan replied, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. I didn't know about him, about any of this. Amelia crossed her arms, her stance defensive. And now that you do? What? You think you can just show up and fix everything with your money? Logan shook his head. No, Amelia. I'm not here to throw money around. I want to get to know him. I've lost so much already. Please let me try. Her eyes narrowed, studying him for a long moment before she stepped outside, closing the door behind her. Lucas doesn't need you, she said firmly. We've been fine without you for 20 years. Logan's chest tightened. I understand that, he said, his voice soft. But he's my grandson. And whether he needs me or not, I need to know him. Amelia hesitated, her defenses wavering. I'll talk to him, she said finally. But don't expect a warm welcome. That evening, Logan returned to his mansion, the vast space emptier than ever. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel: hope. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for Lucas, for Ethan, he was willing to try. The next day, Logan sat in his spacious office, the polished mahogany desk and walls of accolades feeling more oppressive than impressive. He had insisted on meeting Lucas here, hoping the neutral territory would give them both a chance to find some footing. But as the clock ticked closer to noon, his confidence wavered. At precisely 12, the door opened, and in walked Lucas. His presence filled the room with an air of quiet defiance. Dressed simply in jeans and a worn jacket, Lucas carried himself with a calm composure that reminded Logan of Ethan in his younger years. But Lucas's eyes, pale blue like his father's, struck Logan the hardest. Thank you for coming, Logan began, standing and extending a hand. Lucas looked at it, but didn't take it. Instead, he sat across from Logan. I didn't come because I wanted to, Lucas said bluntly, his voice steady but cold. Mom asked me to. Logan nodded, lowering his hand. He had anticipated resistance, but hoped for something warmer. I understand, he replied, and I appreciate that you're here. I just want a chance to talk. Lucas's eyes narrowed. Talk about what? The 20 years you didn't know I existed? Or how you suddenly decided to care now? The words hit Logan hard, but he didn't flinch. I didn't know, he said softly. If you had. What? Lucas interrupted, his voice rising. You would have swooped in and made everything better? Fixed things with your money? Logan sighed, the weight of his guilt pressing down on him. No, he admitted. I can't fix the past. I can't change what's already happened. But I can be here now. I can try to make things right moving forward, if you'll let me. Lucas's expression was a mix of anger and hesitation. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Why do you care now? After all this time, Logan hesitated, searching for the right words. Because you're my grandson, he said finally. And because I've spent the last 2 years grieving your father, regretting all the things I never said to him. I can't change what I missed with Ethan, but I don't want to miss the chance to know you. Lucas didn't respond immediately. He looked down, his expression unreadable, before standing abruptly. I'll think about it, he muttered before leaving the office without another word. Logan remained seated, the silence in the room deafening. He hadn't expected immediate acceptance, but the encounter left him drained. Yet, he resolved to keep trying. For Lucas, for Ethan, he wouldn't give up. The following weeks were filled with restless anticipation. Logan waited, hoping Lucas would reach out, but there was no word. Logan decided to take a different approach, unwilling to let the distance grow. One crisp autumn afternoon, he returned to Amelia's home. This time, he carried a modest gift, a set of tools. The private investigator had mentioned that Lucas worked odd jobs fixing things, and Logan hoped this gesture would show he wasn't here to flaunt his wealth but to connect. When Amelia opened the door, she eyed him warily. "Back again?" she asked, her tone cautious. Logan nodded, holding up the box of tools. "I thought Lucas might find these useful," he said. "And I was hoping I could help around the house. Maybe spend some time with him." Amelia studied him for a moment, her defenses slightly lowered. Finally, she stepped aside. "He's out back," she said. "Good luck." Logan found Lucas in the backyard, tinkering with an old lawnmower. When Lucas saw him, his expression hardened. "What are you doing here?" Logan set the box of tools down beside him. "I thought I could help." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Help? What do you know about fixing anything?" Logan chuckled, the sound dry but self-aware. "Not much," he admitted, "but I can learn. And I figured maybe we could work on something together." Lucas stared at him for a long moment before sighing. "Fine," he said reluctantly, "but don't get in my way." The two worked side by side in silence, the awkwardness palpable. Logan fumbled with tools, his inexperience evident, but Lucas didn't send him away. As they adjusted parts and tightened bolts, the tension began to ease. "You know," Lucas said, his voice quiet, "Dad used to fix things too. He wasn't great at it, but he tried." Logan paused, the words catching him off guard. "I didn't know that," he said. "He never told me." Lucas shrugged. "Probably didn't want to disappoint you." The comment hit Logan like a punch to the gut. He had spent so much time pushing Ethan to succeed that he had never considered how it made his son feel. "I wish I'd done things differently," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I thought I was helping, but now I was wrong." Lucas glanced at him, his expression softening just slightly. "He didn't hate you," he said after a pause. "He was just scared to let you down." Logan felt a lump rise in his throat. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for everything." Lucas didn't respond, but the tension between them seemed to lessen. As they finished repairing the lawnmower, Logan felt a slight sense of accomplishment. Not in the machine they had fixed, but in the fragile connection they had begun to build. That evening, as Logan drove home, he allowed himself a small glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the following weeks, Logan's visits became more frequent. Each time, he arrived not with grand gestures, but with a quiet willingness to help. Together, he and Lucas tackled small projects around the house: a leaky faucet, a broken fence, and a sputtering generator. For Logan, these moments weren't about fixing objects but building something more critical, a relationship. One crisp Saturday morning, as they worked to repair the shed's roof, Logan shared a piece of himself. "You know, Lucas," he began, his voice steady as he passed a hammer, "I grew up in a house not much different from this one." Lucas, perched on a ladder, glanced down at him, skepticism evident. "Really? You? Mr. Big Mansion?" Logan chuckled softly. "It's hard to believe, I know. My father was a mechanic, and we lived in a small place like this. I used to work in his garage after school, handing him tools, learning how things worked." Lucas paused, his curiosity piqued despite himself. "What happened?" Logan hesitated, the memories both distant and sharp. "I wanted more," he admitted. "I wanted to build something bigger. So I left, worked through college, and started my business. But in chasing all that, I lost sight of what mattered." Lucas didn't respond immediately, his focus shifting to the shingles he was nailing into place. "Is that why you and Dad didn't get along?" he asked finally. Logan nodded, his throat tightening. I pushed him too hard, he said quietly. I thought I was helping him by setting high expectations, but I see now that I only made him feel like he wasn't enough. Lucas climbed down the ladder, his expression thoughtful. He talked about you sometimes, he said, surprising Logan. He said you wanted what was best for him, but he wasn't sure he could ever live up to it. Logan felt a pang of guilt. I wish I'd told him he already had, he said. I wish I'd told him how proud I was. Lucas didn't reply, but his silence wasn't cold, it was contemplative. Logan felt a crack in the wall between them for the first time, a tentative step toward understanding. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch after repairing the fence, Lucas broke the silence with a question that caught Logan off guard. Did you ever regret it? He asked. All the time you spent chasing success? Logan leaned back in his chair, the question's weight pressing heavily on him. Yes, he said after a moment. I regret the things I missed, the moments I can never return. I thought success would make everything worth it, but it didn't. It's nothing compared to this. Lucas frowned. This? Being here, Logan said simply. With you. The words hung in the air, unspoken truths passing between them. Lucas looked down at his hands, his usual guarded demeanor softened. I've been thinking about school, he admitted, his voice hesitant. I like working with my hands but want to learn more about cars. Maybe get a degree in automotive engineering. Logan's face lit up with pride. That's a great idea, Lucas, he said. You've got a real talent for this. If that's what you want, I'll support you however possible. Lucas studied him, his skepticism giving way to a flicker of trust. I don't need your money, he said firmly. I know, Logan replied, raising his hands in mock surrender. But I'm here if you need advice, resources, or someone to talk to. For the first time, Lucas smiled, a small but genuine gesture. Thanks, he said quietly. As the sun set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Logan felt a deep sense of contentment. It wasn't the grandeur of his mansion or the success of his business that mattered. It was this, building something real, something meaningful. And for the first time in years, he felt he was on the right path. Lucas's decision to pursue school became a turning point. With Logan's quiet encouragement, he enrolled in a community college offering an automotive engineering program. On his first day of classes, Logan surprised him by showing up at Sarah's house with an old car, a beat-up, rusted sedan that had seen better days. It wasn't much, but Logan had a plan. This, Logan said, gesturing to the car, is yours. But there's a catch. You've got to help me fix it up. Lucas stared at the car, a mixture of skepticism and intrigue flashing across his face. You're kidding, right? This thing is practically falling apart. Logan smiled, shrugging. Exactly. But if anyone can bring it back to life, it's you. Though hesitant at first, Lucas agreed. Over the next few months, the two worked on the car together, their evenings covered in grease and exchanging stories. Logan found himself sharing pieces of his past he hadn't revisited in decades. The nights he spent tinkering in his father's garage, the lessons he learned about patience and resilience. For Lucas, the project became more than just fixing a car. It was about forging a connection with the grandfather he had once resented. Like their relationship, the car was a work in progress, but every repaired bolt and polished surface brought them closer together. One evening, as they tightened the final bolts on the car's engine, Lucas broke the comfortable silence with a question weighing on him. Do you think Dad would have been proud of me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Logan froze, the wrench slipping from his hand. He looked at Lucas, his heart aching at the vulnerability in the boy's expression. Lucas, he began carefully, your dad would have been prouder of you than you'll ever know. Lucas looked away, his jaw tightening. Sometimes, I feel like I didn't know him, like this huge part of my life is just missing. Logan nodded, the weight of his regrets pressing heavily on him. I felt the same way after he died, he admitted. There's so much I wish I'd said to him, so many moments I wish I could have back. But if there's one thing I know, he loved you. The words hung in the air, raw and unguarded. For the first time, Lucas allowed himself to cry, his shoulders trembling as he released the grief he had been carrying for years. Logan didn't speak. He simply placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder, offering silent support. That night, as Lucas drove the newly restored car down the street for the first time, Logan watched from the driveway, his heart full. The sight of Lucas smiling, the wind in his hair, was a reminder of everything he had almost lost and everything he was working to rebuild. Months later, Logan stood on the porch of Sarah's house, watching as Lucas loaded his belongings into the old car. Today was the day Lucas would move into his college dorm, embarking on a new chapter of his life. The boy who had once been wary and guarded now exuded confidence and purpose. "You've got everything?" Logan asked, his tone light, but tinged with emotion. Lucas nodded, glancing up at him with a small smile. "Yeah, thanks to you." Logan shook his head. "No, Lucas. Thanks to you. You've worked hard for this. I'm just glad I could be here to see it." As Lucas climbed into the car, he hesitated, looking at Logan one last time. "You'll come to visit, right?" "Try and stop me," Logan replied, his smile warm. As Lucas drove away, the sun rising behind him, Logan felt an unfamiliar yet welcome sense of peace. For years, he had been consumed by grief and regret, but now, standing there with Sarah by his side, he realized he had finally found what truly mattered. Later that evening, back at his mansion, Logan sat in his study, a photograph of Ethan resting on the desk. He traced the edges of the frame with his fingers, his thoughts drifting between the past and the present. "We've got him, Ethan," he murmured. "He's going to be just fine." Logan leaned back in his chair, the silence no longer oppressive but comforting. He had spent a lifetime building an empire, only to discover that his true legacy wasn't in the wealth he had amassed, but in the relationships he had nurtured. With Lucas now chasing his dreams, Logan felt a sense of redemption, proof that it was never too late to change, heal, and find purpose. As the days turned into weeks, Logan continued to visit Sarah, offering help around the house and finding joy in the simplicity of their connection. For the first time in decades, his life wasn't defined by ambition or regret, but by love and family. As he watched the seasons change, Logan knew that the best chapters of his story were still ahead, built not on past mistakes, but on the hope of the future.